in the conversation, and how we measure it as it relates specifically to accountability and transparency issues, particularly the type of organizations here in the Open Gov Hub are trying to deal with. So let me briefly introduce you to our panelists. You, I think, have their bios, so I won't go into those at great length. But to my left here is Dennis Whipple, most importantly, an extra once in one of Chuck Norris's best movies. But otherwise, co-founder and formerly CEO of Global Giving, executive chairman of Ashoka Changemakers, and now founder of Feedback Labs, an organization that supports citizen feedback through human-centered design, technology, and other inclusive methods. To his left is Olimar Mazanet Guzman, previously number 14 in the world at fencing, I hear. But now the program coordinator for the Technology and Civil Society program at IREX, which is part of the Center for Collaborative Technologies. The Center promotes stakeholder engagement in development, facilitates access to information in open government, among other things. And previously, she has lots of impressive experience working on climate and water issues with the State Department, the UN, and various other organizations. And to her left, Olive Moore, who speaks fluent Irish, that she keeps fluent by talking to herself, apparently. Also head of knowledge and learning at the World Bank's Global Partnership for Social Accountability, an initiative that supports civil society and governments to work together to solve critical governance challenges in developing countries using citizen feedback. She also has significant expertise working on human rights, civic participation, and accountable governance issues around the world, including with Procare and Amnesty International. So a great mix of perspectives, I think, from an organization looking at best practices and sharing tools around this stuff, from an organization that is practicing accountability and creating feedback loops, and then a funder of these kinds of initiatives. So in terms of the order of play, I'm going to ask a few questions to our guests based on some of the really difficult issues that we face during our impact reporting process. But then we want to open it up to you guys as soon as we can, because we know there's a wealth of experience in this room that we want to draw upon. And then for those of you here and online who are watching and listening, please engage on Twitter. The hashtag is ImpactChat. You can send questions to the lovely Sarah, who will collate them and then pass them over, and we can add those into the conversation as well. So let's get going. First question, I think, is about definitions. And Olive, I'd like to turn to you, actually, because the GPSA, the Global Partnership for Social Accountability, has the word accountability in its name. There are a lot of words that are interrelated and interchangeable, perhaps, that don't necessarily have clear definitions related to integrity, accountability, citizen participation, and so on. What do you mean when you talk about accountability?
I guess you talk about social accountability. By social accountability, citizens engaging with government, working for better. Very often that is adapting information and knowledge and generating information in order to engage in structures together. Actually, we're really focused on citizen participation. And very often that translates as
okay, so it's about people.
And participation is about and then people to
Great. Olimar, does that correspond with where you think about accountability?
Sure, and just to build on that very accountability, the way that IREX addresses its making governments more responsive and increasing the voices of citizens within the policy making processes. And we have a few areas that we focus on. We have government reform, which is, I think, something that all of leaders are doing, like engaging with governments, their policies, building their capacity so they can be more responsive to the development needs of citizens. We work with CSOs, like civil society organizations, and this is something that we don't see as much in the US, the UK, but in other parts of the world, as a normal CSO doesn't know what to do. So we work with them in building their capacity, like giving them access to tools so they can do something with responders. And the other side of the debate, which has all the questions like citizens, journalists. We like taking that data, those numbers, that information that comes from the government and translating it into stories, into a narrative that people can consume, and in a way that they feel more engaged with the process they have. They go through like that whole transition.
Okay. It's about building capacity and engaging citizens around data in ways that make people feel power responsible. Okay. Dennis, I have a sense that you might have a slightly different definition. How do you feel about accountability? What does it mean to you in feedback labs?
You know, I started my career at the World Bank 30 years ago. And I heard all of these words: accountability, engagement, capacity building. I'll be really honest with everybody here. I didn't understand this. For the first 5 years, I just sat in meetings and I'm not sure because I could not understand all these words that I just felt that I was not smart enough to understand. And I've come to the conclusion it's taken me 30 years to say that we should get rid of all these words. And it's all these words are obfuscating what we're talking about. That's not why we're here. We tend to use all these words as a sort of fetishistic jargon to justify our existence in our organizations. And when all of them mention people, that's what it's about. That's what this is all about. It's about what do regular people want in their life? Are governments and aid agencies and foundations helping them get it? And if not, what should they do? It's that simple. I'm trying to keep it that simple. I think we should keep coming back to that. It's keep it measurable. But for me, that's what some of there's other words and engagement, etc. Okay, it's harder than you. I don't understand that. I gotta say I don't understand this. All I understand is what do regular people want? Are they getting it? Those are the words.
Yeah, even if you don't have to write I can do something. So I think even if I'm saying the words in my head, like, I remember trick for the person I spoke to in the application and it says requirements and I guess we might be good at if you were their language, but I know when I see it, that helps.
And just to go on that, I'm also one that, and I know that I used them when I was talking before, I tend to avoid referring those words when we're writing or just talking about this whole conference and accountability. And I feel like the word impact also suffers from that. We all want to talk about impact. We don't really understand exactly what impact looks like. We like using it with data, we like using it with output, both the technical knowledge, things like that. So I'm very happy that you brought that up.
So let me confuse things slightly further by bringing in the word impact. I was reading a blog this morning that was talking about impact assessments and was saying, what does that mean? It could refer as much to a car crash as it does to development. So when we talk about impact around accountability, if it's about seeing it, it's about engaging people. How do we measure the impact of that process?
So I suppose from the GPSA perspective, we work a lot with these sort of people that so when we start thinking about how to measure, we have and we need to try out this partnership and have these some sort of national so there's a whole question of our own and we have to have a school student friends. Then we're working together with teams and society. Also, very nice thing working on these are the interventions to change lives. And there's a question of that for me it's like a different conversation. So I guess the first start what kind of intention just being clear. What's our role? What's our responsibility? What's our purpose? And then you have
Well, I think that I'll go back to what Olive said earlier. It's that developers. And we very quickly, all of our organizations, we move away from that. Put all these layers of us. And I just want to dwell on that for a minute because I have a feeling that reducing that distance is key to making progress in this conversation. You can always come up with more clever ways to measure things, like organize things. But I'm really struck by what you said. That's why you do it. That's why you're sitting. It's not because of abstract ideas, but it's an experience. See someone happy with it. And everything built them. And somehow we get disconnected from that. And I'm only guessing that your life, that is full of all sorts of complex reports, and this, that, and the organizational charts, etc. It's so fun. And so one thing that's in my mind is how can we, in our daily work, radically reduce the distance between the person we're talking about and also we're all in the same boat. How can we be confronted with reality? Only if we do that somehow can we get this measure. But I don't know how to do that. I just think that a lot of sort of embroidery around the edge. So it's just so just offer that as like.
But is that where the concept of feedback loops comes in the way that you're thinking about it? Then it's a feedback labs. Or is it about cutting out some of those layers and creating that direct connection between people in power and whoever that's supposed to be responsible to?
We're trying to radically reduce the time and distance between people that people are going to. I don't have the answer. And I think in some ways that's what we're all trying to do, obviously. But that's just kind of possible.
What's your take on this, and how do we show the causality between what we do and the goals that we're trying to achieve when it comes to accountability?
So I think that's a very tricky question, and I was mentioning to Blair this morning that those before the summer, I was having a call with one of our sub-employees with some thirds, and we were trying to figure out how to better present the information to the foundation that's giving us the money about like what impact, like what we have done this past year. And we always like came back to the number of saying like this many people like attended X hours training. And when you look at it, like that number for me didn't really mean anything. But I know that the founder or like the foundation is gonna have slightly by doing that. But I always come back when I went back to Peru. One of the people that we trained with, that I worked there for about 4 years, she decided to start her own organization. To go after local governments and figure out how they were using like this infrastructure funds. And if they were sitting, just like coming up with proposals about how to do that. And that was one person. And she has already started at 3 different projects with different municipalities. And there's not a metric that I can really use to record that. But for me, what she's doing has more deep and more, and translate better what we're trying to do than this, I don't know, 200 people that we're training. So that whole discussion about how you break down those levels, how you all bring it back to what we're trying to do. Me personally, I would always concern us for the distance that actually felt empowered enough to like do that and not person figure out like how she could work directly with the government rather than the people that we train. And I'm not sure if that answered your question, but then I would just say that it's a conversation that we need to continue having, because if the founders see things differently, we see things differently, and the people that we're impacting are the people that we're working on, let's see it differently, but what exactly can we do so we can all like start talking the same language and stop using so much about like the numbers and stuff, essentially the coverage.
Yeah. So it has to be about qualitative engagement and change as much as it is about quantitative change in numbers. that can confuse us between outputs and outcomes and impact, whatever those things mean. Let me shift it slightly to another line of questioning around how we move from technical solutions to political solutions. Accountability is, of course, a very political process, but I think we tend to think that we can come up with tools that fix problems. But of course, best practices are not always practices that get adopted. The practices that are the most politically feasible are the ones that get adopted. So when we are developing accountability tools and ways to engage citizens around these issues, how can we make sure that they fit the context and that they will be implemented politically? Dennis, what's your thinking on that?
Maybe I'll ask the question of my colleagues here when I answer that. For me, at least, increasingly, I think about accountability outside. I think what we're all about, it may not be the case everybody agrees on this, but I think what this group is all about is getting sides. It's transformation, historical transformation. Instead of governments being in charge of allocating some talent, which is the historically traditional form of government, that we're going through a historical phase where people are asserting their power and being parts of it. When I think about it in these terms, at least for me, I think about it. That's very direct emotional feel. And it's very clear. I can imagine measuring that. It's different than some of the other words that we all use. And I'm making fun that I've used it myself. That kind of confuse that idea. Accountability for that. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Accountable for what? And it's kind of, but if you put us on, people have like this, being in charge ultimately. I can rally behind that emotionally. Also, I can imagine that. Simple things. So, I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if that resonates with you guys. So I'm just going to go back.
So that really is practices. And that term that we talked about, to make these changes. That term is I guess the question then around it's so a lot of politics. We understand that all of this and you change as and you change the things, but not changing the things for constant and you're constant. And in some ways, I think what we're trying to do is recognize people like part of and they're good at what they do, how to get on with what we patterns of and challenges to do that without intellectualizing too much. And the ability to intellectualize concepts and ideas, you can get quite different, and this is what it is. And that's where we learn. So the question of how do we understand this, talk about it, check it, rather than just get more directional. That for me is not the teaching of vision concepts, which direction. I give that. All that stuff that's for me, it's about looking at naming it, calling it, and then trying to figure out my name as far as you can, and not thinking, of course,
Well, I just want to reinforce what they said, which is by naming it clearly, get away from. So actually, no, it's not. So it's stuck in. You lose track. And we're just happy with this. A little bit of citizen engagement here, a little bit there, a little bit here. We're happy with that. I believe that we're not happy. Being sober, versus smart, out. Not very good. How is he? Yeah. I don't do that enough. I mean, if that sounds really radical, but it's not that. It's not radical in most Western Europe. It's not radical in the United States. It's what we expect for ourselves. And so it's not short-changed. How people don't care relative, but they're homers. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that building on those you guys' one points, I think it's also about creating opportunities in the sense that I think governments have learned that citizens are not passive. We saw this with what happened in the Middle East, with the events in Africa, like people are no longer like willing to just like take what governments give them. And that had the consequence that governments are not willing to let them just like be open to some opportunities and creating like ways for engaging the makeup for like to talking at least with citizens. Like they want to know what people are doing, like what bothers people before it becomes something bigger, something that they cannot control. And I think for community, for the people that are working in this area, it becomes very crucial to start identifying like those opportunities and build them up or like institutionalize them in a way that whole engagement process is more effective. Like people have like the right tools to like make their arguments, to communicate what they're trying to say, which is still something that even today we have a lot of work.
And you work on technologies at IRA, so how is technology affecting this? And is it too trite to say, as lots of people do in the era of Twitter and everything else, that having these tools is enough to engage people? What more do we need to do? How do we engage them offline to make sure that the online tools work properly?
Yeah, so I work with technology, but I'm not like a technology totalitarian. I know that there are books for it, like I don't think technology is a solution. And so often we forget that just because I have a cell phone, not the like someone in like a refugee camp, that's not like be on their career, like what's going. And we that spend so much time here in Washington DC, like in big cities, we tend to like lose perspective on that. So I do see that technology has a power to facilitate like a conversation and to decrease distances. For example, a lot of the government are centralized and organizations are making the capital. You can use technology to like reach out to like different rural cities and just get back their feedback about what they're doing. That to that extent, like the use of technology becomes like really useful. But you have to understand also like what is the double edge of the use of technology. Not everyone knows how to use a computer. Not everyone has the time or the skills to engage in a proper manner with any like technology device. Maybe like an app, because I know that we are obsessed with creating apps. We can like go rate for health, service facility, and whatnot. But not everyone has the skill to do that, and that's something that we need to recognize. So we do need to like go back to the basics and look at household surveys, how to talk to people to get that from them.
Well, coming back to the point that you were making about adaptive learning, if we think about impact as a process of learning, not just a measure of success and failure at a given point, given particularly with accountability that this is a long-term process of shifting the way that citizens engage with governments, that's going to take time. How do we instigate a process of impact measurement that is more about trying something out, failing, adapting, learning, and then trying it again over time constantly, as opposed to a way of ex post measuring what did and didn't work and then shifting after the difference is finished?
So that's something I need to start looking at and start to exponentially to be a second. We have an acknowledgement team. We great to do to place much. That was great. And even at that, you know, we lost 5% the operations. You know, and that, you know, so we said, well, no, okay, that's a new but I think much of what I'm seeing at the moment is really experiencing that often aren't equipped to deal with that. And they're actually confident. When you have set indications, predetermined indicators at times, the baseline, when you set a baseline, and when you do baseline, it's supposed to be vital. But what if you get put that thing and then 2 years down the line, you have to say, wow, we need to make some change actions. Oh, we need to change. Anyway, you no longer fix that. Or you become married to the success. And essentially, now you're like, geez, it's like this again, like it's good. There's 2 tracks. There's kind of one along with the evaluation track that's very I'm quite interested in systems of role and then to allow training to yeah, we're still stuck in different models. And this is a little bit I could do about debate essentially. To be honest, I don't have, you know, I don't know. We're hard to fix trying to solve it right to what using GAI and the real complex is doing rats and rats. I'm looking for ideas.
So feedback labs. How are you thinking about this? Are members of feedback labs coming up with new ideas on this particular issue?
No, we agreed everything up front with students. 5 years and they're going to evaluate, and by that time I'll be gone, so if it doesn't work out. No, one of the things we had a great exchange with the fund group the other day. I went to our fund of accreditation asking for an extension of some contract, and they came back to me and said, "Why are you asking us this? We should just do what makes sense." And I was struck by A, getting that response, and B, the simplicity of the response. It wasn't come up with a new law and frame and blah, 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 all this crap. It was just, why don't you guys make sure to do what makes sense? And she said, by the way, that budget you said, it's okay, no, we don't expect you to stick to that, because that would be unrealistic. So just allocate the money the way you think it's going to have the most impact. And that was kind of a reference. Okay. We often don't have it. But often we don't have it because we don't ask for it. And I've been surprised at how often I've asked for that flexibility I've got. And how often we're afraid of it. So that's one side. The second is, somebody told me the other day here about dollars. I said, you kind of look at what they're thinking. I said, yeah, they're paid. And I said, why? And they said, because our organization is supposed to be all about transparency. But my boss knows. And it was kind of a shock because I realized that this accountability and transparency and feedback should start at home. And if we don't live that inside our own organizations, it's a little bit of a joke to think that we're going to influence the rest of the world to do that. So that also made me think about, we have to go through this process internally and all with leadership for a number of leaders here, whatever. And so you've got to get good at this internally before we start processing. External demand. So we've got on we continue that type of discussion here in our field. So maybe the first thing we've got to do is get our own active flip side is you do need some structure, so you can't just be changing everything based on it. The key is to come up with some structure where you check in formally, periodically, and make decisions. So if you orient yourself, fine, or something. So,
So the conversations and we're very much some of the things that we find quite determined, and we're trying to find our way around it. Let's say maybe it's we'll take there's a code method that I document it. So there is the key. I think the challenge is that you can practice shift. Not so good and like it.
yeah, that's true.
Their head and it's right. That's right.
And sharing these lessons with each other as well. I think is key and it's a key part of this conversation. One thing we're doing internally for the transparency piece of the Accountability Lab is to put all of our expenses online in real time. Because why not, really? It doesn't take that much to do actually get the system set right. And if we're about transparency, then it's something that we really want to try and do. It might not be the right fit for every organization, but we want to try out things like that and would welcome any comments and ideas on other ways that organizations are doing that.
Yeah, that wasn't an answer. That's not.
Good. Yeah. I was worried maybe I was.
Yeah.
So I know that you mentioned when you were talking about like, having like this discussion, and that's also like your point about like flexibility. Someone that experienced this well, or at least like has some sense of like good idea about like how to do that iterative like learning process from here, measuring impact. I would have to say that, and not because it's my funder, the Gates Foundation has really understood how to talk about impact and how important it is to invest in impact. And we had a project with them that's on access to information. It lasted about 5 years. And in the middle of the program, they were willing to renegotiate like a indicators with us because we understood that we were measuring wasn't like really passionate about what we were doing. And they were fine with that. And I think that it didn't happen only with us, it happened with a lot of other subjects that they had. And that led to a learning process in the organization. For them was like, how do you develop like this monitoring and evaluation framework that has some indicators that you have to report on all the time, but it has enough flexibility for you to like adapt according to like the different activities or like the growth that your programs are doing. So sometimes also when we're talking about scaling up, another word that we love for programs, when you scale up, sometimes what you're doing also changes, like the impact that you have to like change. So your indicators need to be like flexible enough to report that information. And in my experience with working with them, they have built like systems that are flexible enough to gather that information.
Okay, great. So Gates is a good funder for anyone looking for money around impact. So you mentioned the word scaling, which I think is a good segue into another question about how we begin to think about measurement of impact beyond just the point that Olive made within our organization or within the organizations that we happen to be working with or supporting. How do we begin to connect the dots between the impact that individual projects are having to understand what the overall effect is on the system of accountability within a given context? Olimar, you mentioned the word scaling. Have you guys thought about that? When you're scaling something up, do you think about how it fits with what other people do and what the impact is overall?
Ours currently is undergoing with this exercise that we're trying to figure out what is the overall impact of the programs. We have a lot of different programs that comes different areas, education, like civil society building, like gender programs, access to information technology programs. So how do you measure the impact of all of the programs? The easiest answer to that, which I don't think is the right one, is how many people you reach. I think by looking at the number of people you reach, that tells you something about your program. It doesn't really tell you anything about impact. If you ask me, you don't really understand. You've done intervention. What exactly do you do for the life of that person? So definitely interested if someone has good ideas on that. I think that this is something that not Iris on, but a lot of organizations are struggling with. We're trying to figure out if there's like indicators that you can see across programs that can tell you something. Income has also like as one of those, whether someone getting a job as a result of your intervention is a measure of impact. I understand, and I think that we can all agree that there's something that is lost in that translation, but I think if someone has better access to like account opportunities because of something that we do, that's all that we can capture. Something that might not be the right way, but it's one of those ways.
So how you thinking of this?
I feel like yeah, I could remember expecting but we don't think that's going to work as good. Again, we have to do that's something that's going to and I guess so. So I think when we talk about scale, which is really easy to have this term, but particularly because each of us has dynamics and very different. And then scale, and then at the end, change they want to be in their eyes, it would be something entirely different to impact. So I guess that's the first part that I was looking at. A term that's a huge amount. And behind just this assumption of scale, which is scale, which is yeah, I think that's within GPSA, we took that scale, particularly that I know. I know that scale. All of our competitors, and in many cases, try it. We can make them back. It's only that very different way of doing it. We're working in this sector, so not the traditional. Very so for me, scales. So an example is country who have a particular budget and it's going and that budget at the beginning, it's quite difficult. Why we doing now it seems a benefit. Now we've got at the country level, rebate so maybe we should use cost. So if we're going to be part of the primary budget, maybe we should know how to do it. So that's the scale that our require for our lease, that's the scale that we do. But again, everyone else is at bottom line. Again, what is the challenge?
Scale is one of those things that often scales. It's just, you can come up with something that'll, what Olive said is a lot of this. A few years ago, I read a mail book by the head of the American Heart Association. The book described about how he took the American Heart Association from a focus on research. A neurocognition scale was needed to be a research center in all the major metropolitan areas of the United States. And he said, he got his gang together at American Heart Association. He said, what are we here for? The answer is we're trying to reduce the incidence of heart disease in the United States. He said, well, why don't we measure that directly? And then do whatever it takes to reduce the incidence of heart disease. So over the next few years, they just started measuring the incidence of heart disease. And they started thinking about what could we do that would reduce the incidence. And guess what? It wasn't necessarily use it. There's all sorts of advocacy, PR campaigns, tell people to get off the couch, get exercise, and all these behavioral things that has much greater impact. And that made a conversion of program. So I was thinking about, what if we did that in our respective areas? You know, if you were a transportation economist at the World Bank, what if the impact were asking people to use like how good they thought their transportation was in their daily lives? What was that? And then it wasn't about scaling up rural roads or intermodal transport or whatever. It's just about what is going to make people happiest about their daily transportation. And if we come up with some things like that we don't, because the conversation always goes to start. We can't directly control that, so we hold it down. That's always a conversation. And this book by the American Heart Association is like, I don't care. We got it. That's why we exist. So let's find a way to link ourselves to that. If we can't find a way to link ourselves to that, then why do we exist? And that took a huge amount of courage to do that. And maybe that's courage that we should try to emulate in our work. Let's say what we're trying to achieve. Let's put it out there, let's measure it. And then the learning comes about, is what we're doing accomplishing that. If it's not, let's either do it better or let's do something different. Let's not just keep saying this. That's what motivates you. Yeah.
For a long time, we wasn't space sections because it wasn't there. It wasn't project. I think this is an assumption that goes even back. You might think, but actually, it's much more complex. And I quite like this idea of more and more about these organizations. It's actually the citizens. And if they perceive, and someone can perceive something well, then that's it's of course not as complex. There are all kinds of complexities around whether or not the sections that spaces these actions. Culture. So I get it, but it is something we're finding out.
This whole concept of conversation is trying to, or starting to be on part of some of like the discussions that are taking place. I know, for example, a little that have been working and going into the discussions for the post-20 development agenda. If we look for outputs, one of the indicators that we're looking at seriously is the perception of what is it as one of the factors for affecting their governance. Do citizens feel safe in their countries? Feel safe like walking from here to your workplace? What are the implications for that? There's definitely some exercise. I have measured something like that super expensive, requires a set of skills that may not be present as much as some other countries, but I don't think that should be used to stop us. We can recognize that anybody can be done correctly and be successful. So what I don't know, that is sort of like learning process. What best practices can be gathered from organizations like all that are doing this work and they apply that to the development.
Absolutely. And we are going to open this up very soon. But one last question, because it's beginning to push on this issue of how you embed impact measurement into design of programs and make sure that it's integrated properly into the way that we think holistically about what we're trying to do, what the goals are that we're trying to achieve. What ideas do you have for going forward? What do we need to do now? I mean, we've talked about a few ideas, but what can we concretely do to improve the way that organizations in the accountability space measure impact, think about impact, and collectively come together to try and measure it? Dennis.
I'll take up on what you said about percent. Instead of adding that on, I think that I said it should be. And it's kind of right. Think about these Are we being recorded here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's recorded. Okay, then I'll be thinking about it. Think about these developments. What are they called? Social development goals? Sustainable development. All right, can you imagine living in a country, some people may, but most just don't, where there was some board that determined what the government was going to do, and somehow the officials got rewarded or sanctioned based on these goals set forth by this board. And, oh yeah, there was a breakthrough that we're actually going to allow the citizens to tell us a little bit about what they think about it. But we would never put up with this. That's ridiculous. In fact, we have just the opposite. We have a voting system in functioning democracies, which many of us are lucky to live in. They have many flaws, but the bottom line fundamental is that they're based on percent. Whether they like what we're doing. And the politicians, the government goes out there and they offer them a whole bunch of things. There's no board of some overseers that decides that there's 15 things that the people can get, one of which people's perceptions has been put into. So that's the direction I would like this. Those perceptions are all that matters. Just be informed, and they can be informed by all this other data. But the bottom line is we're trying to make people's lives better. We're trying to make them feel better about their lives and more optimistic about the future. If they don't feel better about their life, they don't feel more optimistic for the future of the kids. Then I don't care whether you get any of this other stuff, these SUVs or rural roads or anything, it doesn't matter. Just focus on the start. Rest happens.
Brings it back to the people.
I've been following. You know, it's on so very much very validated. I guess more on a reading, but with the caveat of course, strictly about measurements. You know, it's about raising conversation, friends, balance, the other part of it is that for us trying to it's not starting up, starting to we went at it again, started working again, you know, my colleague a year ago, and the next step for that, maybe trying to find obstacles for learning and their research. How do we work? Trying to be able to think of that buttons. And I'm thinking we talk about it's our not having to future. So for me, I'm trying to practice a little bit our own disincentives and trying to figure out. But again, trying, you know, certainly, but I think that's the values of partnership. If I give that time is a little bit thinking, but yeah.
I think that it requires a little bit of a culture change. The way that we build programs, sometimes I like to say it's thinking first. We think about indicators, we think about like exactly what we're trying to achieve way down the road when that should be in the center of the programs at the moment of designing. What are we trying to achieve, or what change are trying to do with this intervention? What would be like the best way to measure that? Like, what are the conditions now? It's slowly starting to happen. Talking more about baselines, understanding like who this intervention is gonna be targeting at from the moment of design. These were like we used to look at that as the end of the program. So we wanted to measure it and everything else. That was like the in my opinion, like the one approach to it. So the more and more we start seeing that in the way that we, our organizations, funders, governments, take that approach in the way they design projects, I think the better our impact will be. To follow it that way, the better, the more quality or the highest quality of projects we have at the end. So it's just a matter of how we design interventions, like impact indicators.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's open it up. You've been extremely patient. Lots of different strands of the conversation and issues that we could delve into a bit. If people have questions, do introduce yourself and let us know where you're from, and we can try and keep it to a question. Great.
Michael Cooper with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I mean, I think to kind of go on the discussion about how M&E strategy and learning can, best coincide. It seems like impact assessments or impact evaluation is just a tool to produce not necessarily learning, but evidence for learning. And so I guess my question is around, it seems like whenever we do a project, and this is something we really struggle with, that impact evaluation or impact assessment isn't necessarily the best tool for that project, and sometimes we misapply impact evaluation. We just want to know this, which is essentially just a yes/no question. It worked, it didn't work, but sometimes the projects themselves haven't matured enough to actually, just because you can do an impact assessment doesn't mean you should. Which kind of means, and this goes to my question, is when you have an idea for a project and you go through and you develop your outcomes and your indicators and things like that, I mean, I think that that's necessary, but I think that a lot of the thinking that needs to take place is, well, why are we actually attempting this and just not how are we going to actually measure it? Because then I think that that kind of creates the demand for whatever evaluation type you use, a demand for that data. So I guess my question is around what's been your experience with kind of when you're working in your problem phase and in your project design phase, how do you get people to really think about, well, why is it not just, what is it, and that goes to learning. What is it that you really want to learn? Not whether or not this actually worked, but how this fits into your overall framework.
Any thoughts on that?
The tools we have as a district, I think when we come to one it's always constantly trying to get that thing. And they're not looking because then too and
Right.
you get distracted. In the same way as a position activity, we're distracted. So we're hard.
Yeah.
And other than the means, we have to
Designing for the deliverable as opposed to.
It's really there's people trying to do that. It's also constantly reminding ourselves that, oh, it's get caught too. It's about this discussion, this conversation. We can have a learning very much. That's just a tool to try and force us to get which is called a check. And I guess I'm trying to think so let's look at all these different tools. So, and then one is working, another a little bit open.
That's an excellent question, in the sense that I think you asked like 5 different questions. There's an issue about when we go on about understanding and intervention work, like work or didn't, like yes or no. I feel that there's a component of like time scaling in that aspect. Like we can't really measure impact right on a project end. I mean, depending on like the intervention, but mostly like that's not something that you want to like do like right after the project end. You want to like understand like real impact is something that you should like really do down the road, and there's like different issues with that. When it comes to like the designing, I think a lot it also comes from understanding like the constraints that you're working into. like we understand, or like we try our best to like understand what we're trying to do, like what are we trying to change, but the context or like the emphasis that we're, I don't know what word that probably take, that we're trying to work is so imperative that you take that into consideration and just highlight, like really do it in like a pilot phase to understand like how that can help you do that iterative learning process. And then just do that all over again. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah.
Let's have one question.
Sure.
Instead of pontificating, I'd love to get one.
Sure. So,
Andres from the GPSA. Yeah, I heard two very important and very inspiring messages. One of them is basically keep it simple, stupid. And the other one is focus on what matters to people. And also taking your challenge of saying, well, we give up on impact because we don't control it. I think it's actually, simplicity is great, but then actually delivering gets tricky, especially because when you talk about impact, we're usually trying to make a big fudge and claiming, attributing one thing to another as causation, and that really doesn't exist, or at least I don't believe in it. I believe in contribution, especially when we're talking about people. There are sentient, autonomous beings that have their own existence, so it's incredibly arrogant to claim impact on things, on people, on things that happen. So at the end of the day, you have to bring those two independent worlds, the world of impact, what really happens out there in social reality, with your outcomes. What is it that you did, and what should happen according to your theory of change? And you're back to square one. We're coming up with load frames and theories of change to find out whether your outputs, your outcomes are really contributing to those impacts that you would like to contribute to. So I'd like it to take it a step beyond the keep it simple and focus on what matters message, and try to unpack something that I'm still, I guess I work with all the also struggling.
the one thing that I'd like us as the accountability lab to do is begin to move beyond the idea of impact as something separate that relates to measurement. And this is sort of towards the learning point, where it's something that you just do. It's not something you design for. It's low touch, but it's constant. And so it's kind of asking questions consistently that I think could be very simple. That would be, for example, what's working, what's not, and how do we improve? And just doing that constantly on a weekly or a monthly basis with everyone we work with, and just gathering all of that. It's embedded in emails, it's in very quick surveys, oral or written. You just gather that information constantly, and then it's just a process, part of what you do. It's not about making an impact or anything else. It's about
Conducting an evaluation.
Yeah, exactly. It's just part of the DNA.
It can be even simple like that. Something that have started doing is basically having like a conversation with or subjectives about like what's we really want to know, like what's not working in your project and why you think that's happening. And when you have about 10 different subjectives, like exchanging like discussions about like what is not working in their project, and they start seeing that many people are struggling with the similar things that they are, that learning process is just organic. I feel that, or not I feel like, I think that something culturally that also needs to change is that we don't really see failure as a good thing. Like if a project doesn't work, like sometimes how we see that is that we're not longer getting funding, like we're not like our reputations and I get things that this didn't work, and you need to like be a little bit more flexible in that sense, because sometimes like by things not working, you can't really get to why it's like the simple solution.
My name is Alan Hudson, and I work with Global Integrity. I'm also, full disclosure, on the board of the Accountability Lab, which I'm very happy to participate in. I think it's a really excellent panel. Thank you very much for organising it. And I want to kind of build on some of the comments that Michael and Andres in particular made, just to kind of point out a few things that I've spotted. I kind of spotted a little bit, I'm not sure whether it's a tension, but a little bit of a tension between, on the one hand, the idea that we know it when we see it, and on the other hand, about valuing different perspectives. Because, you know, people from different perspectives see things differently. So I think there's a potential issue there. I think there's also, as Andrea said, you know, there's a little bit of a tension between the idea of keeping it simple, but then also the value of frameworks, theories of change even, or clarity about assumptions into, you know, I think those things are essential for learning. So I think there's a potential tension there that is worth exploring. I also think there's a tension around, or an issue worth exploring, as other people have said, around the difference between a focus on impact and a focus on learning. I think impact tends to be about kind of, you know, in quotes, what works, which is a phrase which I hate. I think it's much more interesting and useful to think about how things are playing out in particular contexts, how principles are playing out in practice in particular contexts. Rather than, I mean, what works kind of pretends that we're going to find solutions that can be scaled all over the place. In the governance sphere, that is seldom the case. I think this kind of also relates to, this Olive mentioned this, around, you know, learning for whom. Olive talks about kind of learning about GPSA's impact, also learning about the impact of GPSA's grantees. I think when we think about learning, we always need to think about learning for whom and to do what with that learning. Finally, I mean, I really hope that we can kind of continue this conversation. I think it's wonderful that the Open GovClub can be a space for this sort of conversation and this kind of learning around open governance. I also very much hope that Global Integrity will be very involved in this sort of thing moving forward. We're in the process of developing our strategy, which is very much centered on learning to open governance. I was thinking maybe I should volunteer that we will kind of host a follow-up discussion on this. And also, I actually think it's great that we've got, you know, different sorts of organisations here. You know, we've got World Bank, we've got ILEX, who you know, is a bit of a different sort of organisation. I don't really know what ILEX is. Just like being good friends with Ollie, I don't really know where ILEX is. And then we've got Feedback Labs and French Good Stuff. So we've got quite a mix of different organisations, all interested in contributing to learning around learning. And I think that's really exciting. So thank you.
Thank you, Alan. A very good summary. And absolutely, we can talk about this at the end, but we hope that this is just the beginning of this conversation, not the end, and perhaps there are ways to take this forward. But Matt, yeah.
Yeah, question around the sort of the political backdrop to a lot of this, which I think you touched on, Blair. Because this is just based on my experience in Malaysia, which is the brunt of my experience. But I mean, there's the top-down sort of impact measurements are often the sort of the government mandated, which can be the simple ones like how many you train. Those are kind of the easy ones as a top-down. And then I felt we got a great, much more rich data if we actually went to the people and actually asked them what is actually working, what is your main impediment to realizing your life and work dreams. And then what's in between those two is often the sort of political structure. And I mean on a local level, I mean not just the government, but I mean on a local level you have political structure that sort of determine what can be done, what people sort of are able to achieve. And then, so they can be sort of threatening to sort of have the feel for companies. So I just want to hear your experience and your thoughts on sort of how to overcome those political barriers in some cases in the countries that you work with. And yeah.
I can give you one story about something that we've been working on recently, which is reframing what we do in a positive light. We call it naming and faming rather than naming and shaming, because it's more politically palatable. Because if you can celebrate people that are doing good things and sort of work outwards from there, rather than pointing fingers that are doing bad things, you're able, I think, to shift the dynamics in the conversation sometimes in ways that are useful. So we just ran this television competition in the fall called Integrity Idol, where we asked people to nominate honest government officials from all over the...
They sing while
there was no dancing, there was no singing. We might bring that in next season. But we asked people to nominate honest government officials, and we got hundreds of nominations from all over the country. We had an expert panel that narrowed it down to the top 5. And then we filmed them doing their job, talking about why it's important to have integrity. They got grilled by a Q&A. with a Q&A by citizens in the studio. And then we showed that on national TV in prime time, and we asked people to vote by SMS and Facebook for their integrity item. And we had over 2 million viewers and tens of thousands of votes. And the guy who won is a district education official from Eastern Nepal, previously totally unknown, but has been doing some amazing things to transform the education system through accountability in his district. And so he was presented with his prize on TV. And the point is the process created a national discussion around what it means to serve the public good and to be biased. And because it created so much buy-in, I think it created a positive reinforcement of that conversation and allowed us to push that idea a bit in a way that wouldn't have been possible if it was about pointing out the Nepal's most dishonest public official. So that's one way that we're looking at it, and there may be other ways that we can take that framing and apply it to different types of accountability.
Yeah, we're seeing a similar among feedback Latin members, which are about Blair's theme here. Be carrots, be sticks, but people are seeing a lot more progress with parents. You can't lose track of the bigger picture of politics and structure. That's be naive view of that. But people are reporting that they're making progress. One of our members said one day at a meeting, he said, I'm beginning to think that 20% of the government officials are saints, and they're good at collecting, and 20% are evil, and they're crooks who screw the system for their own benefit, whatever. But the other 60% are just regular people who are doing a regular job, just trying to go to work, come home, minimize the hassle. And it's those 60% that we are. And those just kind of history that we gave those ratios. We're not going to get the venal ones, and we don't need to address the saints. That's 60%. What's interesting?
I think it's also important to remember that government officials are people too. I think they're really easy to do. They're also but they're doing and we talk about them. A lot of social government are very they have abilities to work with a lot of systems. And something that we have learned that's very useful, we try to get government officials involved from the get-go of the project. We want them to feel ownership of the project as much as CSOs have ownership of them. For a clear example is this project, social media social action coordinate that seeks to improve the delivery of services in the northern region of Sweden. And we take the mayor to facilities. And we have also established an hour every week where we have Skype call with different organizations, with everyday citizens, just so they can directly talk have the changes that they have seen. Like if there was something as simple, there was a powerful in Sweden, it's like within 3 days, how happy they are with the government, like that responsive. That positive feedback is very powerful because I think often that
they never get it.
Like they never get it, they never feel appreciated. I mean, it can sound very naive to say it that way, but sometimes that feedback from citizens is very powerful, and that also keeps their vibe to be responsive. Or you're doing something as simple as that, and it doesn't cost you a lot of money. So just actually using others is have a lot of money. It's really knowledgeable and it's how to work. I think it means it's very easy places. It's not that connected with parties or their text. It's that agenda, but and the concept that I trust building concepts is great. Your everyday, your perception of institution based institution. All of that is certainly within the governance of the company.
sits.
Fantastic. We might have time for one more, if there is one. If not, okay, yeah, quickly maybe we can get both in.
Okay, my name is Paras from Nepal. And actually, I'm from Nepal and I happen to be this integrity idol from Nepal. Also, it's my distance. Yes. What I'm saying is, is the word transparency, technology, accountability, all this is, messed up. And the impact of development work has not been felt in the grassroots level. So donor agencies and NGOs, CSOs need to work more on the having impact on the grassroots level. And also I have noticed, the measuring impact is a challenge also. It's very difficult. And thanks for you guys putting this program, and it is very good.
Thank you. Absolutely.
I was kind of curious on looking at impact, not the intended impacts of the program, but sort of the secondary, a lot of times negative impacts. For example, I'm focused on Ebola right now, and all these people are being paid to do jobs that used to be volunteer jobs or just didn't have jobs. And the impacts of the programs are improving. There's less Ebola, safe burials are happening, but then you have this labor force that's about to disappear, and what happens with that? Or you can't get them to be volunteers anymore. That's a huge impact of that. And is there evaluation that's being done on things like that across the board, not just that specific example? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm glad that Alan's volunteered in the follow-up sessions because, no, seriously, there's some really interesting tools being used to get at things like this. There's perceptual data, net promoter score type tools, or unintended consequence data, storytelling. Some really interesting stuff that I never thought in a million years would be valuable or scalable or whatever. I think maybe we should do a session on those. We could talk about 4 or 5 of those things. It's been a huge education for me the last few months. I'm not sure there's more than what I've heard. So I vote that they let Alan engage in the next session where we talk about these stuff because there's no one size fits all. And for those of you, I don't know if we had say all of that paper about clock. Yeah, we'll put it out there. There's a great paper that GPSA done on some of the American, yeah, where he talks about different strands of sentences that you need to look at top and bottom channels of voice and sentence and clarity work. It's actually very good. Eliminate a lot of those I really
and I guess you said that I'm not confident that we do that well, that we and do we actually get learning? We have to actually get to that energy when we did do good practice. And that's what John loves. Mentoring impact evaluation initiative. That's good. It's one of the big takeaways are very tactical factors, and that very often challenges we evaluate it by automatically tend to evaluate certain tasks. The strategic success try to evaluate, therefore evaluate bias. Leave it at that. Jonathan then let's go on these factors. So I guess starting from the beginning,
Fantastic. That might be a good place to stop. Thank you all so much for listening. I won't summarize everything that's been said, but I think clearly we need to focus on people, we need to stay flexible, we need to keep it simple. We clearly have a lot of energy around this topic. Any of you who would like to be involved in the next step around this, please let us know. We will definitely put together a kind of 2-page note that will summarize everything that's been said, that we'll send to you as the basis perhaps for the next step in this discussion. Please do stop on your left as you leave. There is a feedback board. We're all about responding to feedback and accountability, so let us know what you thought. There's also a selfie station. Maybe Sarah could mention more about what's supposed to happen there. There's also fruit and cookies and various other things, so please hang around if you can to chat. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Yeah.